Chief futurist at futurist.com, researcher, keynote speaker, and author Nikolas Badminton joining us on Canada Now for his weekly visit. Nick, according to a new study, there's another reason to worry about climate change. It will result in thousands of new viruses spread among animal species by 2070, which will likely increase the risk of emerging infectious diseases jumping from animals to humans.
Yeah, I mean, I've been actually tracking this since the beginning of the pandemic. I worked with a client a couple of years ago, and this was one of the big things that we needed to consider. You know, with the global warming, with urban encroachment, you know, city growth into rural areas, the growth of like traffic between sort of rural and urban areas, the growth of mega cities, all of these things mean that, you know, that humans are getting closer to the natural world and getting closer to animals. Now, some people, and this isn't actually stated in this article that we're discussing, you know, some people, speculating there's about 7 million coronaviruses that have been undiscovered in nature. This is why you've got these researchers that go into these bat caves and they're all protected in hazmat suits to try and find and try and anticipate what the hell's happening out in nature and out in the animal kingdom as well. So, yeah, this is really interesting. I mean, good long range sort of speculation, 2070. Thousands of new viruses, you know, some of those are going to be potentially as impactful as COVID-19 or the Hong Kong flu, or, you know, some could even be as severe as Ebola, right? So we really need to keep an eye on ourselves, and we really need to put guardrails and oversight into what's actually happening and potentially how these viruses are jumping from animal to human.
Yeah, and to offset that, or to balance things out a bit, researchers said that not all viruses will spread to humans or become pandemics, the scale of the coronavirus, but the number of cross-species viruses increases the risk of spread to humans. You know, and you talk about the places in which it's going to happen. Africa and Asia have been hotspots, Nick, for deadly disease spread from humans to animals or vice versa over the last several decades, and they are at the forefront of this conversation. But meanwhile, they've done the least to create climate change.
Yeah, and we've done the least to actually support them in working out how to be good about climate change. You got to remember, you know, over the hundreds of years of colonization and sort of invasion, and then setting up like multinational businesses from the Western world in these places, we've established this ecosystem and infrastructure. So we have to put our hands up and say, okay, how can we deal with this as a planet? How can we work together? It needs to be a global effort. It needs to be a global effort. We're not going to hit our targets if we align with the Paris Agreement anymore. The IPCC report came out not too long ago, and it's like, you know, it's a pretty drastic state of affairs. California's got its worst drought in several centuries. Look at India and Pakistan right now. It's not even the hot season and they're being roasted, right? It's going to get worse globally. So we're going to have to pay attention and monitor so many things. This is just one of them.
Yeah. And monitoring, of course, the increase of temperature in the world, because the researchers behind this study, they examined how over 3,000 mammal species might migrate and share viruses over the next 50 years if the world warms by 2 degrees Celsius. And research shows that kind of increase in temperature is possible. And you've talked about that in the past.
Yeah, I think it's possible within the next 5 to 10 years as well, Jeff. I think,
oh, my goodness.
And we're not going to make the world cooler. You know, people say geoengineering, we take carbon out. No, it's not going to make the world cooler. This technology can help and whatever. It's the way that we emit, greenhouse gases from industry primarily, and we need to really check that, you know.
Yeah, and phase out fossil fuels to reduce the risk of infectious disease spread. So here we are. The world is grappling with two global crises, the climate change, of course, and infectious disease spread. And this study shows that they are on a collision course, resulting to the increased risk of the emergence of new viruses. But in fact, all this may already be happening in places that are very well populated. We could be seeing this happening right now. Yeah,
in futures work, we call this collapse, Jeff. And ultimately, happy, joy, right? There are 4 alternative futures that we look at in the futures design world, right?
Yeah.
We're either business as usual, we're hitting our limits and discipline, we're transforming ourselves to be better and do better, and we're also potentially hitting decline and collapse. So we're constantly struggling between all of them. So we're kind of teetering on that edge of like transformation, business as usual, and collapse. And it's a dance, and it's really tough. And we've seen that the last couple of years with the pandemic. There's going to be more stories about how tough life is going to get with global warming, and it's not going to get better. And what's happening? Nothing. No one's doing anything. And people need to step up. I do work with the United Nations to try and get the conversation out there. I try and have the conversation with everyone, through these channels, through television, through conferences, and through my clients. It's starting to get through, but what do you do? It's such a big, we call this this is like a huge hyper problem, right? That you just can't fathom how you can deal with it. But one step at a time.
Well, and I want to hear more about conferences, like talking about this at conferences, because here we are talking about it on the radio, you go on television as well, and you throw it out there, and then when the camera's off or the microphone shuts off, you go, all right, well, I hope some people heard that and that'll implement some change. But you don't get the immediate reaction of being in front of people, which you do at conferences. I guess it depends on who you speak to and where you are. But when you talk about cutting greenhouse gases, when you talk about phasing out fossil fuels, this is not new. You wouldn't be the first person to tell them that. So given that, what's the reaction like when you were talking about this?
Some people love it and some people do not like it. Let me tell you 2 stories from live interactions.
Yeah.
So I traveled to the Premier's Forum for Natural Resources in Prince George, British Columbia. This is a number of years ago. Really, really great event, really cool people. And there's everyone there. Natural resources, obviously, there's the pipeline and oil and gas people and whatever. And I give a keynote where I talk about the end of oil and whatever. And a once friendly crowd basically ostracized me, wouldn't even let me sit next to them in the airport, and then wouldn't even let me even talk to me on the plane. These are people that I chatted with ahead of my keynote. Wow. And another story, and some 3 or 4 years later, and in the last 2.5 years, I was in Alberta at a conference, 800 people in the audience, predominantly farmers. I talked about extreme weather conditions, talked about climate change, talked about how we need to consider getting to renewables, electrification, and such like. And a man stood up and he said, the first person stood up and he was like, I think everything that you just said is absolute BS. And it's like, so what do you do? Well, you refute it. You turn them into the points of discussion. I actually went down and had a chat with him. We had an email exchange. It very quickly stopped because he just didn't want to engage. Right. So we've got this world of people. They know their mortality. They know they're going to be dead within 50 years, and they just don't care. And everyone needs to care. Every kid, every parent, every institution, every business, everyone. Me and you, we all need to care. We all need to try and make the right decisions on making the world a better place.
Absolutely. Chief Futurist at futurist.com, researcher, keynote speaker, and author Nikolas Badminton. Nick, appreciate it. We're not going to talk for a couple of weeks because we'll be trading off some vacation time, but we'll reconnect sooner rather than later, I hope. Thanks, pal. We'll talk.
Yeah, take care, Jeff.